Freshman Orientation on Gender-Related Laws. I am Ms. Grace Gonzalez, Guidance Counselor and your host this afternoon. To formally begin the event, may I call on Professor Edelina Baldoza for the invocation to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem by the UE Chorale.
Our Lord and our God, we thank you for gathering us today as one family, the family of the University of the East. To the administrators, faculty members and employees, and to the students, especially the freshmen participating in this occasion, may you send your spirit of love and wisdom. Good God, you entrusted us with great responsibilities. Now that we are in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, there is full of confusion and insecurities in the world and in ourselves. Our nation is striving for economic stability and moral integrity. For all of this, please guide us, O Lord, as we offer ourselves at your service and for the service of our country and our communities. We know, O Lord, that you are the source of all justice, so please help us to be just in our dealing with one another, particularly in our respect for one's gendered identity and sexual orientation. Both the natural law and the civil law uphold the equal dignity of every person. May this moral principle be the value that prevail in our society today, and not the culture of shaming and discrimination. Grant us the virtues of understanding and humility to accept one another's individuality. With your guidance, O Lord, please guide us to improve ourselves by strengthening the working relationship among us. And in doing so, may we in turn help in improving not only the school where we belong, but our society and the world as a whole. Merciful God, we know that it is not within our power that we could accomplish all of this. We believe that it is only through your kindness that we could hope for a better world, attain a progressive and healthy nation, and maintain gender equality in the society. This we ask for the greater glory of your name and for the good of our academic community. Amen.
Bayang magiliw, pelas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, buyat ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisingil. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidingin, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mag-aapi, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
At this point, let us all welcome Director Clemente Divas, Student Affairs Office, UE Caloocan, for his welcome address.
Fellow officials of the university, members of the committee who prepared this orientation, faculty members, and our dear freshman students, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all, especially our dear freshmen, to this orientation on gender-related laws. Just a few months ago, you all attended the freshman orientation program which we conducted virtually with the purpose of introducing to you our university officials, the different offices and the services they provide, our facilities, and the different programs and policies of the university which we believe will help in your transition and adjustment process from being high school students to college students. We hope that you found the freshman orientation program which we conducted helpful in your efforts to cope with the challenges and difficulties brought about by this COVID-19 pandemic. This afternoon, we are holding another orientation for you, our dear freshman students, with the purpose of discussing with you gender-related laws that you need to know and understand as students and citizens. It is our firm belief that by knowing and understanding these laws, you will come to know and understand your rights better, and more importantly, the ways on how to defend and protect these rights. We truly trust that this orientation will significantly augment the gender development programs of the Student Affairs Office and the Guidance, Counseling, and Career Service Office that are already in place. So, to ensure that we realize the objectives of this afternoon's orientation, we invited a young, smart, and beautiful lawyer who happens to be one of our university officials also as our resource speaker. I hope that you all will listen intently to the presentation because I know that you will learn a lot from it and at the same time, you will enjoy it. Good afternoon once again and welcome.
Thank you, Director Diwas, for that warm welcome. I was given the honor to introduce our resource speaker for this afternoon. She is a UE College of Law alumna and the current College Secretary of the UE College of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, with pride and pleasure, let us give a big virtual applause to Attorney Gerald C. Ronyes.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Good morning, freshmen. Welcome to the University of the East. Welcome to the family. We are very pleased that you have chosen this learning institution to further your education and building a brighter future, not just for you, but for your loved ones as well. I hope that you're all in good shape despite the current crisis. But before anything else, I'd like to thank the university for this opportunity. This is actually my first ever recorded video lecture. I would love to do this live because there is no exchange for face-to-face or virtual interaction at least, but I was told that this isn't going to be live interaction. So I decided to create this own video lecture using my novice skills in editing. So please bear with me. Let's start. Our topic is about gender-related laws. The title speaks for itself that these laws are about affording equal rights, privileges, and protection to all gender classifications. There are many gender-related laws in our country. To name a few, we have number 1, RA 9710, otherwise known as the Magna Carta of Women. We have RA number 6949, otherwise known as the National Women's Day. We also have RA number 8353, otherwise known as the Anti-Rape Law. We also have RA number 9262, otherwise known as the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004. We also have RA number 7877, otherwise known as the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995. And for our main topic for this afternoon, we have the newly signed law, popularly known as the Bawal Bastos Law or the Safe Spaces Act. If given a plenty of time, I'd like to discuss these laws in detail, but since it is only for a limited period, I will focus more on the Bawal Bastos Law or the Safe Spaces Act in relation to the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995. But before that, let me give you a brief discussion on the laws I've mentioned. Let's talk about the Magna Carta of Women. This is a comprehensive women's human rights law that seeks to eliminate discrimination through the recognition, both domestic and international, protection, fulfillment, and promotion of their rights, which are among others in terms of employment and other privileges. So for instance, Section 15 of the said law provides that the state shall pursue appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination of women in the military, police, and other similar services, including revising or abolishing policies and practices that restrict women from availing of both combat and non-combat training that are open to men, or from taking on functions other than administrative tasks, such as engaging in combat, security-related, or field operations. This is very clear. Women must be allowed to participate in trainings, both combat and non-combat, as well as from being placed in the positions other than doing administrative matters, which is usually in the office, but also to be deployed in an actual combat, which is mostly given to men before. Another salient feature of this law is the equality in employment privileges. Women in the military shall be accorded the same promotional privileges and opportunities as men, including pay increases, additional remunerations and benefits, and awards based on their competency and quality of performance. Further, women in the military, police, and other similar services shall be entitled to leave benefits such as maternity leave as provided by existing laws. All right, gentlemen, don't raise your eyebrows saying puro na lang babae, babae. Don't worry. Even though only women are the ones who can biologically conceive, if you become parents, there is a law called paternity leave, and that's for you. Now, smile. In addition, the law provides that the state shall ensure that the personal dignity of women shall always be respected. Let's move on to the second gender-related law, which is the National Women's Day. This is actually a very short law which declared March 8th of every year as a working special holiday to be the National Women's Day. This ensures the meaningful observance of the holiday both in public and private sectors. We usually see people wearing pink because pink is somehow associated with female gender. I'm not sure who started it, but as you can see in gender reveal celebration, you'll know if it's a boy or a girl depending on the color, which is usually for a baby girl pink and blue for the baby boy. Some sectors provide women protection related seminars or conduct fun activities to celebrate the holiday. Let's move on to another gender related law, which is the anti-rape law. RA 353 states that any person having carnal knowledge of a woman through force, threat, or intimidation, or by means of fraudulent machination or grave abuse of authority will be punished. Hinalay mo ang isang babae sa pamamaraan ng puwersa, pananakot at pag-abuso ng iyong otoridad. Now, depending on the severity of the case, the offense may be punishable by reclusion perpetua or life imprisonment. Under the law, reclusion perpetua entails an imprisonment of at least 20 years and 1 day to a maximum of 40 years. So please do not commit any crime and waste your life in prison. Let's move on to the next gender-related law, which is the VAUSI law or the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004. This law protects women and their children from violence and threats to their personal safety and security. When we say violence against women and their children, the law refers this to any act or series of acts committed by a person against a woman who, his wife, his former wife, or against a woman with whom the person has or had sexual or dating relationship, or with whom he has a common child, or against her child, whether legitimate or illegitimate, within or without the family abode, which result in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological harm or suffering, or economic abuse, including threats of such acts, battery, assault, coercion, harassment, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty. When we say physical harm, this refers to acts that include bodily or physical harm. Binugbog mo, pinalo mo, okay? Sexual violence refers to an act which is sexual in nature, committed against women or her child. It includes, but not limited to, rape, sexual harassment, acts of lasciviousness, treating a woman or her child as sex object, making demeaning and sexually suggestive remarks, physically attacking the sexual parts of the victim's body, forcing her or him to watch an obscene publications and indecent shows, or forcing the woman or her child to do indecent acts and or make films thereof, forcing the wife and the mistress or lover to live in a conjugal home or sleep together in the same room with the abuser. So you can just imagine if you're placed in that kind of situation or condition. Also, physical harm means acts causing or attempting to cause the victim to engage in any sexual activity by force, threat of force, physical and harm or threat of physical or other harm or coercion. Sexual violence also refers to prostituting the woman or child. The law defines a physical violence to acts or omissions causing or likely to cause mental or emotional suffering of the victim, such as but not limited to intimidation, harassment, stalking, damage to property, public ridicule or humiliation, repeated verbal abuse and mental infidelity. It includes causing or allowing the victim to witness the physical, sexual, or psychological abuse of a member of a family to which the victim belongs, or to witness pornography in any form, or to witness abusive injury to pets, or to unlawful or unwanted deprivation of the right of custody or visitation of common children. We also have economic abuse. This refers to acts that make or attempt to make a woman financially dependent, which includes withdrawal of financial support or preventing the victim from engaging in any legitimate profession, occupation, business, or activity, except in cases wherein the other spouse partner objects on valid, serious, and moral grounds as defined in Article 73 of the Family Code. Another economic abuse is the deprivation or threat of deprivation of financial sources and the right to use the enjoyment of the conjugal, community, or property owned in common. Another act, which refers to economic abuse, is destroying the household property. And also, we have controlling the victim's own money or properties, or solely controlling the conjugal money or properties. Under the law, children are those below 18 years of age or older but are incapable of taking care of themselves, as stated in RA 7610. It includes biological children of the victim or other children under her care. Now, what is a dating relationship? Dating relationship is one which has a romantic involvement. It means that a relationship existed between a woman and a partner who is abusive or has previously abused her, whether or not the relationship was formal. Sexual relations. What is sexual relations? This refers to a single act which may or may not result in the bearing of a common child. Now, who gets protected under the law? The law recognizes the unequal relations between a man and a woman in an abusive relationship where the woman is usually at a disadvantage. Thus, the law protects the woman and her children. The victim child, who is a minor, legitimate or illegitimate, and a person aged 18 years and beyond who doesn't have the ability to decide for himself or herself because of an emotional, physical, or mental illness, can make full use of this law. Any child under the care of a woman is also protected under the law. Now, what can women and children do under the VAUSI law? Under the law, the offended party may file a criminal action or apply for a protection order either as an independent action or as an incident in the civil or criminal action or other remedies. Now, here's this question I've always been asked. Is VAUSI committed by men alone? Women can also be liable under the law. These are the lesbian partners, girlfriends, or former partners of the victim with whom she has or had a sexual or dating relationship. Now, what if a male spouse/partner complains about abuses committed by his wife or partner? So the offender now is the wife or the woman. If this is the case, the partner may file a complaint or case under the revised penal code, but not under VAUSI law. So who may file a complaint under VAUSI law? Any citizen having personal knowledge of the circumstances involving the commission of the crime may file a complaint because violence against women and their children is considered a public crime. Now, depending on what type of act or series of acts committed, the penalties for committing VAUSI are imprisonment, payment for damages, and mandatory psychological counseling or psychiatric treatment. Now let us proceed with our main topic, the Bawal Bastos Law or the Safe Spaces Act. This law was passed in July 23, 2018, and its implementing rules and regulations were approved last October 28, 2019. So, what is safe space? Why is the law called Safe Spaces Act? Come on. I'll give you 5 seconds to think. So, let's pretend that this is a live discussion. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, ang bilis wait lang. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. Well, actually, the law does not define what safe space is. According to Oxford Dictionary, a safe space is a place or environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. One great thing about this law is that safe space follows you everywhere, like literally everywhere, as what you guys would always say, literally. Okay? So the law protects you wherever you are, even online. And because of that, this law is said to be the expansion of Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995. Here's the main reason why. Anti-sexual harassment law covers only certain spaces or places, the educational or training institution, and the place of work. Whereas in the Safe Spaces Act, it practically covers everywhere: streets, public places, schools, churches, restaurants, malls, public washrooms, bars, internet shops, public markets, transportation terminal or public utility vehicles, clubs, hotels, casinos, cinemas, and as I said earlier, online platform is covered by this law. Education and training institutions. And as I said earlier, online platform is covered by this law. Also, education and training institutions and workplace and many more. Anti-sexual harassment law covers only certain spaces or places like the educational or training institutions and the place of work. Whereas in Safe Spaces Act, it practically covers everywhere: streets, public places, schools, churches, restaurants, malls, public washrooms, bars, internet shops, public markets, transportation terminal or public utility vehicles, clubs, hotels, casinos, cinemas, and as I said earlier, online platform is also covered by this law. We also have education and training institutions, workplace, and many more. So, this law encompasses all places where you should feel safe from any gender-based sexual harassment. Before we dig deeper, let us familiarize ourselves with the following terms, as I will repeatedly use these terms for the remaining discussion. First, we have catcalling. Catcalling refers to unwanted remarks directed towards a person, commonly done in the form of wolf whistling and misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs. Now, for some, these are complex words, so let us define each. Misogynistic slurs or remarks means any statements in whatever form or however delivered that are indicative of the feeling of hating women or the belief that men are inherently better than women. Now, what do you mean by sexist remarks or slurs? These are statements in whatever form or however delivered that are indicative of prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex, typically against women. How about transphobic remarks or slurs? These are statements in whatever form, however delivered, that are indicative of fear, hatred, or aversion towards persons whose gender identity and/or expression do not conform with their sex assigned at birth. How about stalking? Stalking refers to the conduct directed at a person involving a repeated visual or physical proximity, non-consensual communication, or combination thereof that cause or will likely to cause a person to fear for one's own safety and the safety of others or to suffer emotional distress. Lagi mong sinusundan, palihim. Tapos bigla mong kakausapin, hindi ka naman kilala. Tapos kapag nilayuan ka, ipipilit mo yung sarili mo. To the point that that person fears for her own safety. So don't do that, okay? So if you like a person, just be civil. If you don't want her or him to know that you have feelings for her, then just keep quiet. Or if not, introduce yourself and befriend her or him, okay? Just don't do stalking because you will be held criminally liable. I'll give you an example. The very common form of catcalling is sipol, okay? Wolf whistling. Or sisipol ka, 'di ba? But not all whistling will amount to harassment, of course. It really depends upon the surrounding circumstances. So you have to consider how was it done, who did it, and in what environment. For instance, you are with your close group of friends hanging out in a beach. You were chilling, maybe drink a little, have some music, and dancing. Now, one of your friends started whistling to harmonize the rhythm of the music while you guys are dancing to the beat, like, or something like that. So that act of whistling alone will not amount to harassment. Why? I will explain later. Now, how about this second example? A woman passing through a group of men having a drinking spree in the street. Men that woman do not recognize. Suddenly, these men wolf whistled while looking at the woman. This can be an example of catcalling covered by law. Why? Again, I will explain later. Let's proceed to the other term used by this code. We have gender-based online sexual harassment. This refers to an online conduct targeted at a particular person that causes or likely to cause another a mental, emotional, or psychological distress and fear of personal safety. Sexual harassment acts including unwanted sexual remarks and comments, threats, uploading or sharing of one's photos without consent, video and audio recordings, cyber stalking, and online identity theft. There is so much going on in different social media platforms. So you need to be very careful in selecting what kind of photos that you will upload in your social media account. Be very careful in typing in your comments, not even in social media or through emails as well. Another term defined in this law is the gender identity and or expression. So this refers to personal sense of identity as characterized, among others, by manner of clothing, inclinations, and behavior in relation to masculine or feminine conventions. A person may have a male or female identity, but with physiological characteristics of the opposite sex, in which case this person is considered transgender. Another term is public spaces. This refers to the streets and alleys, public parks, schools, buildings, malls, bars, restaurants, transportation terminals, public markets, spaces used as evacuation centers, government offices, public utility vehicles, as well as private vehicles covered by app-based transport network services, so Grab or we have before Uber, and other recreational spaces such as but not limited to cinema halls, theaters, and spas. That being said, let us now proceed to Article 1, Section 4 of the law, which tackles about gender-based street and public spaces sexual harassment. The crimes of gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment are committed through any unwanted and uninvited sexual actions or remarks against any person, regardless of the motive for committing such action or remarks. Gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment includes catcalling, wolf whistling, unwanted invitation, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs, persistent, uninvited comments or gestures on a person's appearance, relentless requests for personal details, statement of sexual comments and suggestions, public masturbation or flashing of private parts, groping, or any advances, whether verbal or physical, that is unwanted, hindi kagustuhan, hindi sinasang-ayunan, and has threatened one's sense of personal space and physical safety, and committed in public spaces such as alleys, roads, sidewalks, and parks. The law further states that acts constitutive of gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment are those performed in buildings, schools, churches, restaurants, malls, public washrooms, bars, internet shops, public markets, transportation terminals, or public utility vehicles, as I've mentioned earlier. Now, going back to my first example above, I told you before that it will not fall under the shadow of catcalling defined under this law. Why? It is because of the absence of threat in one's sense of personal space and physical safety. Based on the circumstances, they were just all having fun in there. No, they were chilling, singing, and dancing. No threat to person's own safety or personal safe was involved. On the other hand, the second example I've mentioned will fall under catcalling defined under the law. Why? It is because, regardless of the motive, the woman does not know any of those men. She was just passing by when they wolf whistled while looking at her. You can just imagine how that woman felt, right? If I were in her shoes, ang bilis ko na sigurong maglakad, di ba? Just a segue. So somebody asked me, Attorney, bakit po pag pangit ang sumipol maniac na? Pag gwapo naglalambing or nagpapakyut lang? Well, what do you guys think? Sige nga, sagutin nyo nga. Bakit daw pag pangit ang sumipol, maniac na or may hindi magandang gagawin? Pero pag gwapo, naglalambing or nagpapakyut lang? Sige nga. Because I was speechless for a second because I don't know the exact answer. But what I told her was that sexual harassment cannot be based merely on the physical attributes of a person. Guwapo or pangit, hindi mahalaga yon. Okay? So if either of them commits any violative acts under this law, they will be punished accordingly. Okay? So again, gender-based sexual harassment committed in restaurants and cafes, bars and clubs, resorts and water parks, hotels and casinos, cinemas, malls, buildings, and other privately owned spaces open to public are also punishable. So, diba, wherever you are, this law follows you. If, unfortunately, somebody commits any of the punishable acts, these establishments are obliged to provide assistance to the victims by coordinating with the local police authorities immediately after gender-based sexual harassment is reported, making CCTV footage available when ordered by the court, and providing a safe, gender-sensitive environment to encourage victims to report gender-based sexual harassment at the first instance. The other duties of these establishments are, first, the installation of the clearly visible warning signs against gender-based public spaces sexual harassment, including anti-sexual harassment hotline number in bold letters, and shall designate at least one anti-sexual harassment officer to receive gender-based sexual harassment complaints. In addition, they may deputize security guards to apprehend the persons caught committing sexual harassment acts and to immediately coordinate with the local authorities. Now, aside from the establishment I have mentioned, gender-based sexual harassment committed in public utility vehicles are also covered by this law. The proper government agency may suspend or revoke the franchise of transportation operators who commit gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment acts. And if the acts are committed by the driver, he will also be severely punished. So it follows that if these operators will commit any of those mentioned acts, they will not be allowed to operate anymore because their franchise will be suspended or revoked. Also, if these acts are committed by minors, meaning those below 18 years of age, the DSWD shall take disciplinary measures provided under Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act. So it doesn't mean that if you're a minor, it will save you from being punished. No, you will still be punished accordingly. So be very conscious with your acts. Okay, so we're done with the gender-based sexual harassment committed in streets and public spaces. Let us now proceed with the gender-based online sexual harassment. Now, what are the acts included in the gender-based online sexual harassment? It includes acts that use, number one, information and communication technology in terrorizing and intimidating victims through physical, psychological, and emotional threats. Unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and comments online, whether publicly or through direct and private messages. So that is very clear. So for instance, the remarks and comments could either be publicly or through direct and private messages. Another act is invasion of victims' privacy through cyber stalking and incessant messaging, uploading and sharing without the consent of the victim any form of media that contains photos, voice, or video with sexual content. Another act is any unauthorized recording and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online, impersonating identities of victims online, or posting lies about victims to harm their reputation, or filing false abuse reports to online platforms to silence the victims. So those are the gender-based online sexual harassment acts. Are there any exemptions? Yes. Exemption to acts constitutive and penalized as gender-based online sexual harassment are authorized written orders of the court for any peace officer to use online records or any copy thereof as evidence in the civil, criminal, or trial of the crime, provided that such written order shall only be issued or granted upon written application and examination under oath or affirmation of the applicant and the witnesses, and also upon showing that there is reasonable grounds to believe that the gender-based online sexual harassment has been committed or is about to be committed, and that the evidence to be obtained is essential to the conviction of any person or to the solution or to the prevention of a crime. If those conditions are not met, any record, video, or photo, or copy thereof of any person shall not be admissible in evidence in any judicial, quasi-judicial, legislative, or administrative hearing or investigation. So we're done with gender-based sexual harassment committed in streets and public spaces, and also we're done with those committed online. So now let's proceed to gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. The crime of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace includes the following. First, an act or series of acts involving any unwelcome sexual advances, requests, or demand for sexual favors, or any act of sexual nature, whether done verbally, physically, or through the use of technology such as text messaging or electronic mail, or through any other forms of information and communication systems that has or could have a detrimental effect on the conditions of an individual's employment or education, job performance, or opportunities. Sadly, this is very common in the workplace. These acts, if not timely prevented, would result to rape in some cases. We usually see on teleseries or in movies an example of this. A fresh grad young woman, hungry to learn every bit of the job, striving hard to accomplish what is asked of her job description. Now here comes somebody who could be her supervisor or boss or office mate, who constantly sending her messages containing sexual innuendos or any unwanted sexual remarks. This is a form of a gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, another sexual harassment act in the workplace is a conduct of sexual nature and other conduct based on sex affecting the dignity of a person, which is unwelcome, unreasonable, offensive to the recipient, whether done verbally, physically, or through the use of technology such as text messaging or electronic mail, or through any other forms of information and communication system. Another conduct is the unwelcome and pervasive and creates an intimidating, hostile, and humiliating environment for the recipient, provided that the crime of gender-based sexual harassment may also be committed between peers and those committed to a superior officer by a subordinate, or to a teacher by a student, or to a trainer by a trainee. So that's clear. It could be the other way around, to a teacher by a student or to a student by a teacher. Now, we keep hearing about information and communication systems. This refers to a system for generating, sending, receiving, storing, or otherwise processing electronic data messages or electronic documents that includes the computer system or other similar devices by or in which data are recorded or stored, and any procedure related to the recording or storage of electronic data messages or electronic documents. Ang haba ng meaning, di ba? So, example, of course, your phones, your computers, okay? Your desktop computers, your laptops, your recorders, okay? So those are the examples of information and communication systems. Now, what are the duties of the employers? Employers or other persons of authority, influence, or moral ascendancy in a workplace shall have the duty to prevent, deter, or punish the performance of acts of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. Towards this end, the employer or person of authority, influence, or moral ascendancy shall, number 1, disseminate or post in a conspicuous place a copy of this law to all persons in the workplace. Second, provide measures to prevent gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace, such as the conduct of anti-sexual harassment seminars. Third, create an independent internal mechanism or a committee on decorum and investigation to investigate and address complaints of gender-based sexual harassment, which shall, these are the duties of the committee, adequately represent the management, the employees from the supervisory rank, the rank and file employees, and the union, if any. Second, designate a woman as its head, and not less than half of its members should be women. Third, be composed of members who should be impartial and not connected or related to the alleged perpetrator. In other words, the members should be neutral, okay, not biased, and not connected, hindi kadugo or related to the alleged perpetrator. Fourth, investigate and decide on the complaints within 10 days or less upon the receipt thereof. Fifth, observe due process. Sixth, protect the complainant from retaliation. This is very important. Why? Because there is a high possibility that the perpetrator will retaliate against the victim for filing a complaint against him. And lastly, guarantee confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. Going back to the duty of the employee, going back to the duties of the employers, the fourth one is to provide and disseminate in consultation with all persons in the workplace a code of conduct or workplace policy which shall, number 1, expressly reiterate the prohibition on gender-based sexual harassment. Second, describe the procedures of the internal mechanism created under Section 17C of the Act. Third, set administrative penalties. So those are the duties of the employers. Let's now go to the duties of the employees and the co-workers. Employees and co-workers shall have the duty to, first, of course, refrain from committing acts of gender-based sexual harassment. Second, discourage the conduct of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. Third, provide emotional or social support to fellow employees, co-workers, colleagues, or peers who are victims of gender-based sexual harassment. And lastly, report acts of gender-based sexual harassment witnessed in the workplace. So we're finished with the third one, which is in the workplace. So let us go now to the gender-based sexual harassment in educational and training institutions. All schools, whether public or private, shall designate an officer in charge to receive complaints regarding the violations of this law, and shall ensure that the victims are provided with a gender-sensitive environment that is both respectful to the victim's needs and conducive to the truth-telling. Every school must also adopt and publish grievance procedures to facilitate the filing of complaints by the students and faculty members. Even if an individual does not want to file a complaint or does not request that the school take any action on behalf of the student or faculty member, and the school authorities have the knowledge or reasonably know about the possible or impending act of a gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence, the school should promptly investigate to determine the veracity of information and knowledge and the circumstances under which an act of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence were committed, and take appropriate steps to resolve the situation. Now, take note of this. Even if an individual does not want to file a complaint, perhaps out of fear for retaliation, or does not request that the school take any action on behalf of the student or the faculty member, and school authorities have the knowledge or reasonably know about the possible or impending act of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence, the school should promptly investigate to determine the veracity of such information or knowledge and the circumstances under which the act of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence were committed, and take appropriate steps to resolve the situation. If the school knows or reasonably know about acts of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence being committed that creates a hostile environment, the school must take immediate action to eliminate the acts, prevent their recurrence, and address their effects. Once the perpetrator is found guilty, the educational institution may reserve the right to strip the diploma of the perpetrator or issue an expulsion order. The Committee on Decorum and Investigation, or the CODI, of all educational institutions shall address gender-based sexual harassment and online sexual harassment in accordance with the rules and procedures contained in their CODI manual. The Committee on Decorum and Investigation, or the CODI, of all educational institutions shall address gender-based sexual harassment and online sexual harassment in accordance with the rules and procedures contained in their CODI manual. Let us go to the duties of the school heads. School heads shall have the following duties. Number 1, disseminate or post a copy of this law in a conspicuous place in the educational institution. Second, provide measures to prevent gender-based sexual harassment in educational institutions, like information campaigns. Third, create an independent international mechanism, or a CODI, to investigate and address complaints of gender-based sexual harassment which shall. So these are the duties of the CODI. Number 1, adequately represent the school administration, the trainers, instructors, professors or coaches, and the students or trainees, students and parents, as the case may be. Second, designate a woman as its head, and not less than half of its members should be women. Third, ensure equal representation of persons of diverse sexual orientation, identity, and/or expression in the CODI as far as practicable. Fourth, be composed of members who should be impartial and not connected or related to the alleged perpetrator. Fifth, investigate and decide on complaints within 10 days or less upon receipt thereof. 6, observe due process, which is one of the fundamental rights enshrined in our Constitution under the Bill of Rights. 7, protect the complainant from retaliation. And 8, guarantee confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. So the duties of the Committee on Decorum and Investigations are practically the same with the ones we've discussed in the workplace. The only difference is the type of person whom the committee will represent. All right, at this juncture, allow me to discuss the liabilities and corresponding penalties for these gender-based sexual harassment acts committed in all spaces that I have mentioned. Bear in mind that the penalties depends on what type of acts were committed. So let us go back to the specific acts and penalties for gender-based sexual harassment in streets and public spaces. The following acts are unlawful and shall be penalized as follows. For the acts such as cursing, wolf whistling, catcalling, leering and intrusive gazing, taunting, pursuing, unwanted invitations, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs, persistent unwanted comments on one's appearance, relentless requests for one's personal details such as name, contact, and social media details or destination, the use of words, gestures, or actions that ridicule on the basis of sex, gender, or sexual orientation, identity and or expression including sexist, homophobic, and transphobic statements and slurs, and persistent telling of sexual jokes, use of sexual names, comments and demands, and any statement that has made an invasion on person's personal space or threatened the person's sense of personal safety. The first offense shall be punished by 1,000 pesos and a community service of 12 hours, inclusive of attendance to a gender sensitivity seminar to be conducted by the PNP in coordination with the LGU, local government unit, and the PCW. The second offense shall be punished by arresto menor, ranging from 6 to 10 days of imprisonment or a fine of 3,000 pesos. For the third offense, it shall be punished by arresto menor, ranging from 11 to 30 days of imprisonment and a fine of 10,000 pesos. So dalawa, imprisonment and a fine of 10,000 pesos. Moving on to another act, such as making offensive body gestures at someone and exposing private parts for the sexual gratification of the perpetrator with the effect of demeaning, harassing, threatening, or intimidating the offended party, including flashing of private parts, public masturbation, groping, and similar lewd sexual actions. So for the first offense, it shall be punished by a fine of 10,000 pesos and a community service of 12 hours, inclusive of attendance to the gender sensitivity seminar to be conducted again by the PNP in coordination with the LGU and PCW. For the second offense, it shall be punished by arresto menor, ranging from 11 to 30 days of imprisonment or a fine of 15,000 pesos. For the third offense, it shall be punished by arresto mayor, ranging from 1 month and 1 day to 6 months of imprisonment and a fine of 20,000 pesos. Moving on to another acts such as stalking and any of the acts mentioned in Section 11, paragraphs A and B, the previous acts that I have mentioned, when accompanied by touching, pinching, brushing against the body of the offended person, or any touching, pinching, or brushing against the genitalia, face, arms, anus, groin, breasts, inner thighs, face, buttocks, and or any part of the victim's body, even when not accompanied by the acts mentioned in Section 11, paragraphs A and B, shall be punished with the following. For the first offense, it shall be punished by arresto menor, ranging from 11 to 30 days, or a fine of 30,000 pesos, provided that it includes attendance in a gender sensitivity seminar also. For the second offense, it shall be punished by arresto mayor, ranging from 1 month and 1 day to 6 months of imprisonment, or a fine of 50,000 pesos. For the third offense, it shall be punished by arresto mayor in its maximum period or a fine of 100,000 pesos. So palaki ng palaki depending on the gravity or the severity of the acts committed. Let us now proceed to the penalties for gender-based online sexual harassment. So the penalty of prisión correccional in its medium period, meaning an imprisonment ranging from 2 years, 4 months, and 1 day to 4 years and 2 months, or a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 500,000 pesos, or both, at the discretion of the court, shall be imposed upon any person found guilty on any gender-based social harassment. If the perpetrator is a juridical person, an example of that is a duly registered corporation, its license or franchise shall be automatically deemed revoked, and the persons liable shall be the officers thereof, including the editor or reporter in the case of print media, and the station manager, editor, and broadcaster in the case of broadcast media. An alien, meaning a non-Filipino citizen who commits gender-based online sexual harassment, shall be subject to deportation proceedings after serving the sentence and payment of fines. So those are the penalties for gender-based online sexual harassment. Let's now go to the liability of the employers in the gender-based sexual harassment in workplace. In addition to the liabilities for committing acts on gender-based sexual harassment, meaning the previous ones that we've discussed, employers may also be held responsible for, number 1, non-implementation of their duties, as provided in the penal provisions, or not taking action on reported acts of gender-based sexual harassment committed in the workplace. Any person who violates subsection A, meaning the non-implementation of their duties, shall upon conviction be penalized with a fine of not less than 5,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos. Any person who violates subsection B, this refers to the non-action on reported acts, shall upon conviction be penalized with a fine of not less than 10,000 pesos and not more than 15,000 pesos. There shall be a routine inspection to be conducted by the Department of Labor and Employment for private sector and the Civil Service Commission for the public sector. So far, we're finished with the liabilities and penalties for gender-based sexual harassment acts committed in streets and public spaces, in the workplace, and online. Let us now proceed to the liability of the school heads and the penalties. In addition to the liability for committing acts of gender-based sexual harassment, principals, school heads, teachers, instructors, professors, coaches, trainers, and any other person who has authority, influence, or moral ascendancy over another in an educational or training institution may also be held responsible for number 1, non-implementation of their duties under Section 22 of this Act, and second, failure to act on reported acts of gender-based sexual harassment committed in educational institution. So any person who did not implement their duties shall upon conviction be penalized with a fine of not less than 5,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos. And for any person who failed to act on reported gender-based sexual harassment shall upon conviction be penalized with a fine of not less than 10,000 pesos but not more than 15,000 pesos. Bear in mind that students are liable as well. Minor students who are found to have committed acts of gender-based sexual harassment shall only be held liable for administrative sanctions by the school as stated in their school handbook. The Department of Education, the Commission on Higher Education, and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority shall conduct regular spontaneous inspections to ensure compliance of the school heads with their obligations under the law. In every penal statute or law, there is what we call prescriptive periods, meaning these are the time limits set forth by law within which to file a complaint against the perpetrators. For instance, under the Safe Spaces Act, for gender-based sexual harassment acts committed in the workplace or educational institutions, the victim must file the complaint within 5 years. Otherwise, the complaint will be dismissed. So, it is important to immediately take action and report the incident to the proper authorities and file the complaint. There is one exception under this act: those gender-based sexual harassment acts committed online. The law states that it shall be imprescriptible, meaning you can file the complaint anytime. Before I forget, let me just add 2 more things before I proceed to the court cases. I mentioned earlier that Safe Spaces Act is said to be an expansion of the old law, Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. And again, one of the main reasons is that in Safe Spaces Act, you are protected everywhere, unlike in the old law, which only mentions about the workplace and educational institutions. Now, number 1, in the old law, only persons in authority could be charged as offenders. There are no provisions for harassment by subordinates or peers. Now, under the Safe Spaces Act, anyone can be an offender. And the second one is, the Safe Spaces Act covers even sexist, homophobic, and transphobic remarks. That means you can file a case against someone who says something like, "Yung mga baklang yan, dapat naggugupit lang yan sa parlor eh." That is an example of a sexist, homophobic, and transphobic remark. Remember that the Safe Spaces Act do not supersede the provision of the anti-sexual harassment law. If the offense committed qualifies under both laws, then they can be punished accordingly under both laws. I am now at the last portion of my lecture. Yehey! Yehey for everyone, malapit nang matapos. I am going to talk about a sexual harassment case decided by the Supreme Court. This case is entitled Baksin versus Wahiman. Petitioner Juscoro Bacsin is a public school teacher of Pandan Elementary School, Pandan, Mambahaw, Camiguin Province. Respondent Eduardo O. Wahiman is the father of AAA. Since the victim is a minor, her true name must not be revealed for her protection. So AAA is an elementary school student of Juscoro. AAA claimed that on August 16, 1995, petitioner asked her to be at his office to do an errand. Once inside, she saw him get a folder from one of the cartons on the floor near his table and place it on his table. He then asked to come closer, and when she did, Juscoro held her hand, then touched and fondled her breast. She stated that he fondled her breast 5 times and that she felt afraid. A classmate of hers, claiming to have witnessed the incident, testified that the fondling incident happened just as AAA related it. Because of that incident, Juscoro Bacsin was formally charged with misconduct by the regional director of the CSC. In his defense, Juscoro claimed that the touching incident happened by accident, just as he was handing AAA a lesson book. He further stated that the incident happened in about 2 to 3 seconds and that the girl left his office without any complaint. The Civil Service Commission found petitioner Juscoro Bacsin guilty of grave misconduct, act of sexual harassment, and dismissed him from the service. The issue in this case is whether or not petitioner Juscoro Bacsin is liable for the acts committed. The Supreme Court ruled in the affirmative. The High Court said that even without an explicit demand from petitioner, his act of mashing the breast of AAA was sufficient to constitute sexual harassment. Moreover, the Supreme Court added that sexual harassment in an education or training environment is committed under the anti-sexual harassment law when the sexual advances result in an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment for the student, trainee, or apprentice. AAA even testified that she felt fear at the time petitioner touched her. The High Court further said that the particular act of petitioner cannot in any way be construed as a case of simple misconduct. Sexually molesting a child by any form is a revolting act that it cannot but be categorized as a grave offense. Parents entrust the care and the molding of their children to teachers and expect them to be their guardians while in school. Petitioner has violated that trust. The charge of grave misconduct proven against petitioner demonstrates his unfitness to remain as a teacher and continue to discharge the functions of his office. And that's the end of my discussion. Usually I would ask if you have questions, you may raise it now, but sadly this is not live. So before I leave you, I know it's too soon, but if you decide to become warrior lawyers, join us in the UE Law community. Once again, thank you all for listening and not sleeping. And remember to be always mindful and conscious of your acts towards every person. I am Attorney Jeriel C. Rondes, College Secretary of the UE College of Law. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions regarding the talk given by Attorney Rondes, kindly email your questions to the Student Affairs Office, sao@ue.edu.ph, or the GCCSO, guidance@ue.edu.ph. Kindly answer the evaluation of the event by using the link flashed on your screen because this will serve as your attendance to this event. Before we conclude this event, we would like to give a special treat. Ladies and gentlemen, to give a special intermission number, please welcome the UE Chorale.
There's a fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch and it's bringing me out the dark. Finally, I can see you crystal clear. Go ahead and tell me out, then I'll lay your ship bare. See how I leave with every piece of you. Don't underestimate the things that I will do. There's a fire started in my heart, reaching a fever pitch and it's bringing me out the dark. The source of your love the beat. Baby, I have no story to be told, but I've heard one on you and I'm gonna make your head burn. Think of me in the depths of your despair, making a home down there as mine sure won't be shared. The scars of your love remind me of us, they keep me thinking that we almost had it all. The scars of your love, they leave me breathless, I can't help feeling we could have had it all. Rolling in the deep, you had my heart inside your hands, and you played it to the beat. We could have had it all. Rolling in the deep, you had my heart inside your hands, and you played it with a beating. Throw your soul through every open door. Count your blessings to find what you look for. Turn my sorrow into treasure gold. Lay me back in kind and reap just what you sow. We could have had it all. We could have had it all. We could have had it all. Rolling in the deep, you had my heart inside your hands, and you played it to the beat. We could have had it all. Rolling in the deep, you had my heart inside your hands, and you played it, you played it, you played it, you played it to the beat.
Thank you to the UE Chorale for that wonderful number. And now, please join me as we sing the UE hymn.
Pamantasan ka namin, mahal, ilaw sa karimlan. Buhay, lakas, dunong, dangal, pamantasan ka ng bayan. Ang pangalan mo ay walhati, at sandigan ka ng lahi. Pamantasan ng silangan, pamantasan ka namin mahal. Pamantasan ka namin mahal, ilaw sa karimlan. Buhay, lakas, dunong, dangal, pamantasan ka ng bayan. Ang pangalan mo ay walhati, at sandigan ka ng lahi. Pamantasan ng silangan, pamantasan ka namin mahal.
Again, many thanks to all of you for attending today's event, Freshman Orientation on Gender-Related Laws. And please allow me to end the event with my signature phrase, thank you, and let us all be safe in mind, body, and spirit.